Are any of you guilty? Then why aren't you angry? They may take our freedom, but you take your own dignity.
We just had the egos.
That's what they want. They want you to think you are nothing. Don't give that to them. We will have justice. I'll give you my word.
We have nothing. Why they hate us?
Look what we have achieved. They brought us here to be their servants. In less than a generation, we threatened to be their masters. When we work together, we can do anything.
When we work together, they call us Mafia.
They say Mafia to create fear. We are protected by laws and by justice. We do not need the Mafia.
Signore McGregor, you have money. Maybe laws protect you.
In the war, I fought with the Louisiana infantry for those laws. I saw men give their lives for those laws. They are mine and they are yours. They will not forsake us.
By the early 1960s, the public record on La Cosa Nostra was strong. The deeper origin story was fog. Mafia itself is older than the American mob, with theories stacked high. One popular tale traces it to 1282's Sicilian Vespers, church bells ringing in revolt against the French. Its slogan, "Death to the French is Italy's cry," supposedly birthing the word. Joseph Bonanno told Gay Talese a family version. A brother ran the streets crying, "Mafia, Mafia, my daughter," after a French outrage. The problems are obvious. Contemporary writings don't mention it. Dictionaries of the era don't include it. And in 1282, Sicilians didn't think of themselves as Italian. An author found the word in 1658, but it didn't reach a dictionary until 1868, then defined as a neologism meaning bravado. By 1876, another dictionary labeled it Piedmontese, roughly gang. Vizzini's La Mafia, 1880, claimed Giuseppe Mazzini coined the term during the 1860 Sicilian revolt, naming a secret society from the initials of its motto. Mazzini authorizes thefts, arson, and poisonings. Mazzini did find secret societies. Their codes echo later groups, up to and including sanctioning assassination for political ends. He was even linked, denied by him, to a failed attempt on King Charles Albert, supplying a dagger and papers to a Corsican who lost his nerve. In 1890, a reputed mafioso arrested in New Orleans told an undercover cop the Mafia's founder was a great brigand named Giuseppe Mazzini. But the case against Mazzini as founder falls apart as quickly as it's built. He was a liberal. The Mafia's impulse is conservative. The safest call is Francis Crawford's. The word's origin is doubtful. Whatever the etymology, the Mafia drew U.S. attention by the late 19th century, especially in New Orleans, where the 15th of October 1890 assassination of a senior public official became an early milestone in America's education about the organization that would, decades later, be called La Cosa Nostra. The first time the English-language press clocked the Mafia, it read like a dispatch from a war zone. September 1874. The London Times said refugees were fleeing Sicily to Perugia to escape a new Camorra. The Sicilian Mafia, a secret society with its own laws and a code of silence that overruled the state. By November 2nd, the paper reported Rome thought it had crushed the honorable society. It hadn't. 3 years later, the name Mafici surfaced with Gunsmoke. An English banker, John Forrester Rose, was kidnapped in Sicily. When the ransom didn't come fast enough, his wife received his shriveled ear. Benjamin Disraeli's government gave Italy an ultimatum: catch the gang, or Britain would send ships to do it. An Italian brigade cornered the outlaws near Palermo. The boss, Antonio Leone, went down, his number. 2. Giuseppe Esposito was caged, tried, and sentenced to life. Then he bribed his way out, vanished, and by November 1878 slipped into New York with 6 hard cases. New York wasn't welcoming. Reformers had broken the Tweed ring. The Irish and Jews ran the rackets. Esposito could rebrand, like the Vaccarelli brothers who became Kelly, slid in with the Yos, and produced Paul Kelly, the 5 Points boss, whose young muscle would include Johnny Torrio, Al Capone, and Salvatore Lucania. Or he could find friendlier ground. He picked New Orleans, Mediterranean heat, a big Sicilian colony, and a standing Mafia presence. Spring 1879, he arrived as Joe Randazzo, opened a fruit and vegetable business, took a new wife, Sarah Castagno, leaving another with 5 kids back in Sicily, and made the rounds at the best restaurants. He even made peace, briefly, with Joseph P. Macheca, the American-born Sicilian power in the quarter. The superintendent of police then was Tan Boylan. His cousins David and Mike Hennessy were top detectives. When Esposito's abandoned wife in Sicily told authorities where her husband was hiding, 2 New York private eyes, James Mooney and Dan Boland, came south and teamed with the Hennessys. July 5, 1881, 11 a.m. In front of St. Louis Cathedral, they took Esposito down clean. He was shipped to New York, extradited to Italy, convicted of kidnapping, extortion, and 6 murders, and locked away. The Mafia answered. 11 days later, July 16th, Tony Labruzzo, fingered as the informant, was shot dead. Macheca, back in the saddle, forced a City Hall shake-up that August. He leveraged his Democratic Club muscle to reorganize the police. The Hennessys were demoted and placed under Thomas Devereux, the new chief of detectives. Bad blood followed. October 13th, 1881, Mike Hennessy and Devereux traded gunfire. Mike took a bullet. Devereux died. The Hennessys beat the murder rap. In April 1882, but were bounced from the force. New Orleans rolled on. In 1888, the voters brought back Joseph A. Shakespeare, a reform mayor from the old-line aristocracy, more a rebalancing of power than a moral crusade. He named Dave Hennessy superintendent of police. That promotion set up what came next. October 15th, 1890. Cold, wet, fog over the quarter, ankle-deep mud in the unpaved streets. Hennessy, 32, walked home from a police board meeting with Captain William O'Connor of the Boylan Detective Service. At Girod Street, Hennessy waved him off. No need to come any farther, Bill, and kept west toward 275 Girod, where he lived with his mother. Sawed-off shotguns opened up from a shanty half a block away. 6 wounds, 4 superficial, 1 serious, 1 mortal. Hennessy managed to draw and fire back. O'Connor sprinted to him. "Who did this, Dave?" "Dagos," Hennessy said. "He got last rites around 1 a.m. and died at 9. City Hall launched a dragnet. Dozens of Italian and Sicilian immigrants were grabbed, some for little more than speaking poor English. Shakespeare appointed a committee to probe secret societies, oath-bound assassins. The city staged a state funeral. Hennessy lay in state in the council chamber where Jefferson Davis had once rested. A mile-long procession took him to Metairie Cemetery. 2 days after the shooting, a newshawker named Thomas Duffy asked to see one of the prisoners to identify him. When guards produced Antonio Scafidi, Duffy pulled a .32 and fired. As the guards wrestled him down, he shouted, "If there were 75 more men like me in New Orleans, we'd run all the Dagos out of the city." Scafidi survived. Duffy got 6 months. On November 20th, indictments hit 19 men, some for ambush and attempted murder, others, including Macheca, as accessories. Trial opened February 16, 1891, in Old St. Patrick's Hall. Prosecutor Charles Lusenberg, defense by Thomas J. Semmes, a former state attorney general, reportedly paid with a pillowcase full of money. From 780 prospects, they found a jury. Of 319 witnesses summoned, 154 testified, 67 for the state, 84 for the defense. The transcript ran 800 typed pages. Mid-March, Judge Joshua G. Barker directed acquittals for 2 men. The jury hung on 3. The rest, Macheca among them, were found not guilty. With other charges still pending, the judge remanded everyone back to the parish prison. He said it was for their protection. The town erupted. In Lafayette Square, jurors were jeered, "How much did you get?" That night at the Boston Club, W.S. Parkinson, Shakespeare's campaign manager, was tapped to lead the movement to correct the failure of justice. Newspaper owners held their presses to front page a call for a mass meeting at the clay statue at 10 a.m. Saturday. Come prepared for action. March 14th broke bright. Up to 8,000 people gathered. Parkinson worked the crowd. The chief shot down by the Mafia. Justice mocked. Who would follow him to vindicate D.C. Hennessy? The mob marched to the parish prison. The warden, outnumbered, swung the doors and let 19 prisoners loose to hide. It saved 8. 11 were hunted, shot, hanged, or both. 2 corpses dangling from trees were used for target practice. Pasquale Corte, the Italian consul, arrived to horrors of slaughter, bodies swaying. Of the dead, 3 had been acquitted, 3 were mistrials, 5 hadn't stood trial. The reaction split the country. The New York Times said the killings had made life and property safer. The Washington Post called the citizens provoked, breaking a reign of terror. Theodore Roosevelt, a 33-year-old civil service commissioner, called it a rather good thing, bragging he'd said so in front of various Dago diplomats. Italy's ambassador, Baron Fava, filed formal protests, demanded compensation for families, punishment for killers. Relations cratered. Both countries recalled their envoys. Attorney General William H. Miller sent the U.S. Attorney for New Orleans, William Grant, to look. On April 27, 1891, Grant reported he couldn't connect any lynched man to bribery of the jury, had no direct evidence tying them to the Mafia, but admitted the public had, for a great many years, believed the Mafia existed in New Orleans and that few of its victims dared talk. The Orleans Parish Grand Jury had fewer doubts. On May 6th, it called the acquittals startlingly amazing, the state's case strong and more than sufficient. It found evidence of efforts to reach prospective jurors and indicted 6 men for jury fixing. 3 convicted, 2 acquitted, 1 not tried. On the organization itself, the grand jury said flatly, a secret society called Mafia exists. Its officers and many members are unknown. Some are US-born of Italian origin. Most are Italians and Sicilians. It praised legitimate mutual aid societies, condemned assassination, and slammed immigration law as sadly deficient, unable to sort meritorious and law-abiding from vicious. On the lynchers, the grand jury passed. Too many people involved. No indictments. The shock waves travelled. Italy's navy was one of the world's strongest. America's was paper-thin. War talk pushed Congress to fund ships. Within 8 years, those ships would sit off Cuba after the Maine blew in Havana Harbor, and American troops would come ashore. The Platt Amendment would write Washington's right to intervene into Cuba's constitution until 1934. At home, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge used the moment to drive immigration restrictions that would bind the country for decades. Only in 1960, with John F. Kennedy, would that course begin to bend. Historian Samuel Eliot Morrison later wrote The Prejudice Plane. Sicilians suspect for importing the Mafia. Eastern Europeans suspect for being Jewish and possibly red. What really happened in New Orleans? Perfect certainty is impossible in any violent mess with politics, press, and prejudice layered on. But the line of succession in that city's underworld isn't folklore. It runs through names, businesses, funerals, and habits, from Macheca to Charles Matranga, to Sam Carella, to Carlos Marcello. Even skeptics concede that's telling. The cleanest reconstruction belongs to David Chandler. His version, Macheca, born 1843, rose fast. In 1869, a newcomer from Palermo, Ralph Ainello, set up a rival outfit. Macheca had Frank Saccaro blow Ainello away with a lupara and took his chapter. He ceded to Esposito for a time, reclaimed power after the 1881 arrest. By 1890, factions loyal to Joseph Provenzano and Charles Matranga were fighting over the docks. April 6, 1890, Provenzano's men blasted Matranga's crew with shotguns at Claiborne and Esplanade. Hennessy arrested the shooters. The Matranga side filed complaints. Despite the fix, the Provenzano men were convicted, then granted a new trial. Hennessy promised to show up Macheca and the Matrangas. Macheca told reporters Hennessy was handling a strictly Italian affair the wrong way, and he will answer for it. He stationed men, and a 14-year-old lookout, in a shanty near Hennessy's house. 2 days before the retrial, October 15th, the signal came. The luparas thundered. The lynchings didn't break the local mafia. They barely dented it. Charles Matranga ran the family until 1922. Then Sam Carella, then Carlos Marcello. When Matranga died October 28, 1943, age 86, executives from United Fruit and other big firms who needed his goodwill showed up to pay respects. The massacre left something else behind, a habit of sloppy labels. In Sicily, it's the Mafia, around Naples, the Camorra, in Calabria, the honored society. In America, the words blurred. Later studies would toss around terms like Black Mafia and the Dixie Mafia for groups that had nothing to do with Sicilian tradition. Revisionists, G. Schiavo, Henner Hess, Joseph Albini, Richard Gambino, argued the Hennessy hit wasn't mafia at all, just Padroni-style labor bosses feuding inside a patron-client system. They were right that bigotry, economics, and politics ran heavy. But the leap from more than the mafia was at work to there was no organization asks you to ignore direct, concrete signals, while some of the same writers accept, without strain, the organized reality of the Irish Molly Maguires in Pennsylvania coal country. New Orleans, in 1890–91, wasn't a myth. It was the American debut of something old from Sicily, a secret society that could marshal money, fix cases, order murders, and shrug off a lynch mob. The city bled, the country chose sides, and the word mafia entered the national mouth for good. Before Prohibition, a coast-to-coast syndicate is a stretch. What you had were pockets, independent mafia outfits in the big cities, each running its own play. In 1903, an 18-year-old from Sicily named Nicola Gentile landed in America. He spent decades in the life, fled back to Sicily in 1937 after a narcotics case in New Orleans. He jumped bail, and in retirement wrote a sprawling Italian memoir, Vita di Capo Mafia, published in 1963. Gentile's take was blunt. Every noble charter eventually bends to force and fear. The honored society, the Mafia, came over with Sicilians, Calabrians, and Neapolitans, and took root wherever they did. In New York and Brooklyn alone, he said, there were 5 Borgate families. Gentile and later Joseph Valacchi both said the same thing. Right before Gentile left the States, the scattered crew started acting like one system. Decades later, the FBI's wires would catch insiders reminiscing about how it happened. and the story matched up. By the 1920s, Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria ran a New York family with three names that would define the American Mafia: Charles Lucky, Luciano, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello. In 1927, Salvatore Maranzano arrived from Castellammarese del Golfo and set up his own family. The war that followed, the Castellammarese War, pulled in New York and Chicago. Masseria's side, a Bronx outfit under Steve Ferrigno, a line that would pass to the Mangano brothers, then Albert Anastasia, then Carlo Gambino, and Al Capone's Chicago machine. Maranzano's lineup: Joseph Profaci in Brooklyn, later Joseph Magliocco, then Joseph Colombo, and Joseph Aiello in Chicago. Valachi remembered the beats. On February 26, 1930, Masseria had Gaetano Reina killed when Reina resisted a move on his ice racket. Masseria jammed Joseph Pinzolo into the Reina slot. Pinzolo was murdered September 9, 1930, and Gaetano Gagliano took over. He'd die naturally in 1953. Thomas Lucchese would inherit. Valachi was proposed into the old Reina crew, while Pinzolo wore the crown. Maranzano himself ran the induction. Joseph Bonanno stood in as his compere, godfather. Then came the money war. From a second-floor walk-up on Pelham Parkway, Valachi was posted to watch Ferrigno. Joe Profaci drifted in and out, game planning. He said Maranzano and Galliano each threw in $150,000 to fight Masseria. Every week, $5,000 came up from Steve Magadino in Buffalo, and $5,000 from Joe Aiello in Chicago, until Profaci walked in one day with a long face. "We're out of money from Chicago." Capone got Aiello. On November 5, 1930, as Ferrigno stepped out of 759 Pelham Parkway South, he was hit. The war wouldn't stop until one boss did. Salvatore Lucania was born November 11, 1896, in the sulfur mining town of La Cara Fridi, Palermo province. His parents, Antonio and Rosa, brought him to the Lower East Side in 1905. Antonio worked a brass bed factory, took citizenship in 1929, died in 1941, a straight man. The other kids kept clean. Charles didn't. He quit school before finishing 5th grade, did time in the Brooklyn Truant School, tried a hat factory, walked out. "If I had to be a dumb," he told a probation officer, meaning a penny pincher who played it straight, "I would rather be dead." The sheet starts early. At 18, unlawful narcotics possession, half a dram of heroin, 6 months on an indeterminate sentence. Arrests in 1921 for a loaded gun, 1923 for heroin, 1926 for weapons, 1928 for assault and robbery. He built a network beyond Italians: Meyer Lansky, Arnold Rothstein, Legs Diamond, Dutch Schultz, Bugsy Siegel. On October 13, 1929, men grabbed him, beat him to a pulp, and strung him from a beam in an empty Staten Island warehouse. The Times wrote it up. The legend says that's how he became Lucky. In truth, the nickname was already floating around, a twist on Luciano, and he kept breathing. By 1931, Luciano was Masseria's key lieutenant, but Maranzano was landing ambushes of them. Luciano decided to end it his way. On April 15, 1931, he set up a peace with Maranzano for Masseria at Nuova Villa Tamaro, 2715 West 15th Street, Coney Island. Genovese and others from Masseria's side ate lobster and Chianti, drifted out. Luciano suggested cards while they waited. Around 3:30 p.m., he excused himself to go to the washroom. 3 men, underworld talk later named Siegel, Anastasia, Joe Adonis, walked in and fired about 20 rounds. 6 hit Masseria in the back and head. He never turned. That night, according to Nicola Gentile, Vincent Troia was summoned to Luciano's apartment. "Tell your compare Maranzano," Luciano said. "We have killed Masseria, not to serve him, but for our own reasons. Within 24 hours, we want his answer to a meeting." The war was over. Luciano's move had just begun. Late April 1931, Maranzano staged a 5-day gathering at a big hall on Washington Avenue in the Bronx. Valachi was there. Maranzano crowned himself capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses, and laid out the new order. New York would be divided into 5 families. Each family would have a boss and underboss, with capo regime beneath them, and soldiers beneath the capos. Each soldier would be assigned to a crew and meet his men. He read off rules. No more Neapolitan, Sicilian, Calabrian wars. Organization first. Chain of command respected. Death for talking. Hands off members' wives. Disputes heard inside. It sounded like Caesar, because a lot of it came down through the old Italian secret society playbook. Mazzini's era. The code dressed up for business. He formalized the map he'd drawn since 1927. 2 families from his own structure, Profaci and Bonanno. Galliano with Lucchese as underboss. Luciano over the old Masseria outfit, Genovese under him. The 5th to Philip and Vincent Mangano. Decades later, at a Senate hearing, Valachi was asked the organization's name. He said, Cosa Nostra. That set off a cottage industry of second-guessing. Some reporters claimed J. Edgar Hoover, late to acknowledge the Mafia, had fed Valachi the phrase to justify budgets. The record doesn't back them. Peter Maas recounts how the FBI actually got it from Valachi. Early on, he was under the Bureau of Narcotics and gave them nothing. The FBI sent in Special Agent James P. Flynn, a pro's pro. On September 8, 1962, Flynn leaned in. "What's the name?" "Is it Mafia?" Valachi. "No." That's what outsiders say. Flynn gave him a hint. "Cosa..." And Valachi went pale. "Cosa Nostra. So, you know about it." Flynn didn't bully him. He worked him, talked, argued, let him cool off, needled him when it helped. Meanwhile, the Bureau had something even better than confessions. Microphones. In Chicago, in September 1959, a bug in Gus Alex's tailor shop picked up Sam Giancana and Anthony Accardo, talking about a commission. Names rolled out. Raymond Patriarca in Providence, Stefano Magaddino in Buffalo, Joseph Zerilli in Detroit, Joseph Ida in Philadelphia, Sebastian LaRocca in Pittsburgh, and the New York contingent, Profaci, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno. As the Kennedy years expanded the program, agents compared notes. At first, in 1962, one wire team wrote down La Causa Nostra, others logged La Cosa Nostra, or Onorata Società. On August 12, 1963, Associate Director Courtney Evans laid it out in a memo. First live mention had come a couple of years earlier as La Causa Nostra, our cause, from sources who didn't speak Italian cleanly. Translators settled on La Cosa Nostra, our thing. As boss of bosses, Maranzano set up behind the Hotel Commodore by Grand Central and fronted through Eagle Building Corporation, 230 Park Avenue. 6 months into his reign, he decided he could do without Lucky and Vito. "One last meeting," he said. 2 o'clock, business as usual, and then he'd have them clipped in the hallway. On September 10th, 1931, at 3:50 p.m., 4 men posing as police walked into Maranzano's office. He was shot 4 times, stabbed 6. Later, Valachi heard they were Lansky's shooters, acting for Luciano. One, Red Divine, supposedly confirmed it to him. They'd wanted to cut Maranzano's throat, Valachi was told, but he fought, so they shot him. People still argue whether Luciano ordered a broader purge that night, the so-called Night of the Sicilian Vespers. Historian Humbert Nelli says the killings were mostly a New York cleanup. Thomas E. Dewey later guessed the body count at around 40. There was no ledger. What mattered was the result. The Mafia didn't vanish. It standardized. 5 New York families, a commission instead of a single dictator. A code that punished talk and kept business inside. The scattered crews Gentile described had become an organization that could scale and last. The National Syndicate had a chassis. It's the one law enforcement would spend the next generation learning, wire by wire. Maranzano threw his coronation in New York. Luciano held his celebration in Chicago and rewrote the script. No more capo di tutti capi. He replaced a dictator with a board, a commission of bosses. The old Mafia families didn't disappear. They got welded into a new machine, the National Syndicate. Valachi got tapped to go to Chicago and testify against Maranzano, justify killing a boss. He passed, said he wasn't the speechmaker type. Nicola Gentile was there and remembered the lineup. Luciano, Profaci, Bonanno, Galliano, and Vincent Mangano from New York. Capone representing Chicago, Frank Milano out of Cleveland. One by one, other families read the room and signed on. Lucky came a long way from hanging half dead in a Staten Island warehouse. Now it was apartment 39C, the Waldorf Towers. He signed in as Charles Ross, tailored suits, big nights, the right women. But the party sat on top of business. He needed politicians and territory. At the 1932 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, Franklin D. Roosevelt was angling for the nomination. Joseph P. Kennedy worked the rooms, helped tip William Randolph Hearst and California to FDR. James J. Hines, the West Side boss in Manhattan, was there with Frank Costello. Luciano camped a few floors below in the Drake with Tammany's John Marinelli, pledged to Al Smith. Meyer Lansky was in the building too. Everyone understood politics picked mayors and judges. Judges picked winners. Then came the map drawing. In 1939, Colliers ran a series by Richard Dixie Davis, the crooked lawyer who fronted for Dutch Schultz. He laid out the new national order, alliances stitched together out of Lucky's Waldorf suite in spring 1934. Some writers later called it a combination, a wider syndicate with the Mafia as a dominant partner, not a separate kingdom. One theory even had Luciano handing overall control to Lansky when he went away on the prostitution case. That played good in print. On the street, authority doesn't transfer by memo. Angelo De Carlo, a Genovese capo, put it plainer on an FBI wire in 1961. Back in the day, outsiders didn't know a thing. Maybe Meyer knew about it, but the rest of the mob didn't. He used an old word, combanesce. A year later, he said it straight. The combanesce and the Mafia is the same thing. Whatever you called it, the point held. Under Luciano, the outfit standardized. Families, a commission, rules. Business first. To enforce order, Luciano used a separate tool, Murder Incorporated. The press gave it the name in 1940. It dated to 1927, built by Louis Lepke Buchalter, electrocuted in 1944, and stocked mostly with Jewish hitters. The Mafia was the only client. A contract didn't travel hand to gun. Luciano passed to Joe Adonis, Adonis to Albert Anastasia, Anastasia to the shooters. As Brooklyn D. Burton Turkus said after he broke the unit, assassinations weren't drama. They were maintenance. They kept the rackets earning. And the investigative rule he learned is the same one that still applies. You can chase the smoke forever. Until someone inside talks, you get nowhere. One of Lucky's largest cash businesses was prostitution. Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, 200 houses, over 1,000 women. gross around $12 million a year. He didn't romanticize it. He caught gonorrhea 7 times and syphilis once, and told a Madam Florence Cokie Flo Brown he hated the racket. Not enough money for the risk. The women had stronger words. By the time the state flipped the lights on, they told what it took to build that industry. Kidnappings, dope, rapes, a will broke and put on the street. They worked us like dogs, one said. Then they kicked us out. Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey didn't want the case at first. Then he saw it for what it was. A clean shot at Luciano. From January 11th to February 1st, 1936, 3 phones were tapped, over 100 arrests. With numbers, witnesses felt safer and talked. A girl on the stand described what happened to those who broke silence. Cigar burns on feet and stomach. April 1st, 1936. A 90-count indictment for compulsory prostitution. Lucky was grabbed in Hot Springs, shipped back to New York. Dewey's opening to a blue-ribbon jury stripped the respectability off the Waldorf address. Lucky sat at the top. His word, "Do this," was enough. 68 witnesses took the stand. 40 prostitutes, a dozen bookers, pimps, male madams. Defense lawyer George Morton Levy fought hard. The problem was arithmetic. The life didn't add up. Luciano denied the whole thing, but couldn't explain the money behind the suits and the tower suite. Tax returns from 1929 to 1935 showed he never reported more than $22,500 a year. Dewey then walked him through long-distance call logs to top underworld names. It wasn't just vice, it was organization. "Convict him," Dewey told the jury, "or tell the world the base gangster can go free." June 7th, 1936. Guilty. June 18th. Justice Philip J. McCook hammered the sentence, 30 to 50 years. At Sing Sing, the psychiatrist called him a dangerous individual. Then they sent him north to Dannemora. Inmate 92,168 ran laundry. Dewey didn't stop at Lucky. Arthur Flegenheimer, Dutch Schultz, used muscle and Jimmy Hines's political protection to steal Harlem's numbers from its black bankers. From June 10th to October 29th, 1936, Dewey tapped a phone in Hines's office. He picked up enough on lawyer J. Richard Davis, Schultz's link to Hines, to flip him. Hines went down. Prison kept Lucky quiet until January 3rd, 1946, when Governor Dewey sent a clemency message to the legislature, parole for deportation. The memo noted a wartime rumor that after Pearl Harbor, naval intelligence used Luciano to tamp down sabotage on the docks and collect information. He cooperated, the note read, though the actual value isn't clear. Luciano walked out to federal custody. The SS Laura Keene was set to sail February 11th, 1946. On the pier, reporters found a line of longshoremen with bailing hooks. The company man denied seeing Albert Anastasia, who ran the Union Local and the Muscle. That afternoon, Frank Costello and other friends held a send-off. Lobster, spaghetti, wine, old stories. Next morning at 8:50 a.m., the ship pulled away. Lucky wouldn't see America again. In 1947, Walter Winchell wrote that Luciano was in line for a Congressional Medal of Honor for war work. The Army, Navy, and OSS denied it all. A retired Navy officer first confirmed, then under oath said, "Nothing significant. The rumor wouldn't die." In 1971, Meyer Lansky, dodging indictment from Israel, told reporters the story straight. Naval intelligence worried about Italian longshoremen and fishermen aiding the enemy. DA Frank Hogan called Luciano's lawyer. Lansky and Costello told Lucky a white lie. That help might buy him daylight, and Lucky snapped the whip on the waterfront. New York's Commission of Investigation had already dug into the release in 19,545 witnesses, 2,883 pages, behind closed doors. After Dewey died, the papers came out in 1977. The wiretaps and testimony matched Lansky's version. The Navy used the Mafia for dock security and Sicily contacts ahead of the invasion. Commander Paul Alfieri admitted the Sicilian sources were Mafia, whether they'd ever say it out loud. There were no deals, no dismissed cases, no medals. Joe Lanza, the Fulton fish market boss who helped, was indicted and went to prison. As for Lucky, Washington made sure he stayed outside. They leaned on Italy to ban him from Rome, Milan, Sicily, and they warned Cuba's president that medicine shipments would stop if Luciano set up shop in Havana. He settled in Naples, modest apartment at 46/11 Via Tasso. The legend says he lived like a count until he died of a heart attack at Capodichino Airport on January 26, 1962. On another FBI tape in 1962, DiCarlo painted a leaner truth. For years, Lucky owed grocery and butcher bills. Late in life, Vito Genovese put him on a pad, 2 a month, then 3, so he didn't want for anything. Whatever the money, the judgment from the men who knew him was simple. This thing would never have turned out the way it is today if it wasn't for Charlie. A voice added, Charlie and Vito. Vito Genovese was born November 21st, 1897, in Rosiglino near Naples. He hit New York at 15, Queens first. His father ran a small contracting shop, then Mulberry Street in Little Italy. Early collar at 20 for a gun. He met Luciano and the crew. In their rookie days, they ran glass shattering, rock through a display window, grab what you can before the bell. Power to Vito meant possession. He fell for Anna Patillo, his fourth cousin, 12 years younger. One problem, Gerard Vernotico, her husband. On March 16, 1932, cops found Vernotico, 29, garroted with Antonio Lonzo, who apparently saw the job. Valachi said Vito ordered it. 12 days later, Vito married Anna at the municipal building. Not everything broke clean. 2 years on, Vito staged a rigged card game money machine scam, took in about $150,000. The fixer, who lined up the mark, Ferdinand Boccia, pushed for his share. Vito hired Ernest Rupolo and William Gallo to kill Boccia, and then, as insurance, to kill Gallo. According to Valachi, Vito used other shooters for Boccia, while Rupolo tried and failed to murder Gallo on September 9, 1934. Gallo fingered Rupolo, who drew 9 to 20 years. The Boccia case circled back to Vito. He caught an indictment and took the obvious out. Italy, 1937. In exile, he lived big. He and Anna had toured Italy in 1933 with a letter to Achille Pisani, a fascist party secretary. When Vito returned in 1937, Valachi says he brought $750,000. Anna flew money in by the bundle, $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 at a time. He spent like a baron and bought friends. Anna said he gave $250,000 to build the fascist party HQ in Nola. There was also evidence Vito used Carmine Galante to kill Carlo Tresca, the anti-fascist editor, on January 11, 1943. Mussolini thanked him with a title, Commendatore del Re. The Luciano machine had given America a commission. Vito planned to come back and take it. In 1944, Brooklyn cops got a break on the Ferdinand Boccia murder when hitter Ernest Rupolo walked out on parole, caught another shooting, and tried to save himself. He told detectives Vito Genovese gave the order. He named a corroborating witness, Peter Latempa, a cigar store clerk, because in New York, you don't convict on one voice alone. A grand jury re-indicted Genovese and 3 others. Italy had already flipped sides that fall. Genovese flipped two signed on as an interpreter for the Allied military government in Nola. He couldn't help himself. On August 27, 1944, Owen C. Dickey from Army Intelligence picked him up for running a black market syndicate. In custody, Vito laid $250,000 on the table. Dickey, 24 years old, turned it down. Vito pressed, "You're young, take the money, nobody cares." When that didn't work, he threatened. Then he changed tone. "You're doing me the biggest favor of my life. You're taking me home." He knew something Dickey didn't. Le Temper, the corroboration, sat in protective custody at Raymond Street Jail with gallstones. On January 15, 1945, he took pain meds and swallowed enough poison, the city toxicologist said, to kill 8 horses. Genovese landed back in New York on June 1, 1945. Without Le Temper, the Boccia case collapsed. In summer 1946, the state let him go. Assistant D.A. Julius Helfand told the judge on June 11, 1946, why the file went cold. The other witnesses were missing, too scared to talk, or knew that talking meant death. Rupolo kept his head down after 1949. He'd done time for the Gallo assault without ratting further. But on August 27, 1964, his corpse slipped its concrete in Jamaica Bay and bobbed to the surface. 11 stab wounds, 6 gunshots. The case pointed to men in the Profaci family. They beat it at trial. Everyone said his murder wasn't Genovese. Everyone also understood the calendar. November 1946. Lucky Luciano, with paperwork in order, showed up in Havana and dialed New York, Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans. He called a meeting. Everybody came. Genovese, Costello, Anastasia, Accardo, Marcello, and Lansky, who wasn't in the books, but didn't need to be. The handoff happened there. Luciano passed power to Genovese. It didn't get noticed officially until 1949. That's when Frank Costello, who'd acted as boss while Vito was in Italy and prison, hosted a dinner at the Copacabana. Deputy Chief Inspector John F. Shanley told the Senate later, Costello met Vito at the door, gave him the best seat. The word traveled fast. Vito had emerged. He wasn't grateful. Valachi said Vito was sore that while he was gone, they sewed up everything. He would fix that, Costello included. First, he fixed his house. While Vito lived foreign, Anna ran his Italian lottery and lived at 29 Washington Square West, 1 floor under Eleanor Roosevelt. When Vito came back, they moved into a $75,000 spread on Skyline Drive in Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey. And, Anna said, dumped another $350,000 into renovations and furniture. They lived high and fought higher. She said he beat her. He ran women. In December 1952, she filed for divorce in freehold. Her testimony opened the books, $20,000 to $30,000 a week from the lottery. I know, she said, I ran it. 24-carat gold and platinum dishes. The best silver money could buy. A $4,500 mink. $250 suits. $60 shoes. At least $500,000 hidden in a Swiss safe deposit box. Meanwhile, on paper, between 1952 to 1956, Vito claimed $7,000 to $15,000 a year in income. The court didn't buy the Pauper Act. $300 a week alimony and $1,500 in costs. Vito pivoted to the old country look, a $100 a month bungalow at 68 West Highland Avenue, a 2-year-old Ford, 10 suits, none over $100. Cheap plastic saints on a dusty dresser. Kids, and 8 grandkids over for Sunday spaghetti. He cooked. He told neighbors he'd moved to pay the alimony, told friends, forget the high living. It'll put you in jail. Valachi couldn't understand why Vito let Anna talk. In Atlanta, federal, he'd see Vito tear up over her, Others weren't so lucky. On June 19, 1953, the day Anna was set to face a Monmouth County grand jury, her partner at the 82 Club, Stephen Franzi, turned up, strangled. Valasci said it for what it was, a message. Anna got it. She told the grand jury she knew nothing, and if she ever did, she forgot. Frank Costello, Vito's main obstacle, had his own heat. He'd been convicted of contempt of Congress for stiff-arming the Kefauver hearings. After appeals, he started an 18-month sentence on August 22, 1952, and walked on October 29, 1953, for good behavior. In April 1954, the feds hit him for income tax evasion. Treasury agents did a net worth case, spending versus reported income, $51,095 short over 4 years, 144 witnesses, 500 exhibits. The verdict was a formality. After appeals, May 14, 1956, Costello went back in on a 5-year bit. He hired Edward Bennett Williams, who won bail after 11 months. Costello returned to his rhythm, mornings holding court at the Waldorf Astoria, afternoons in the Biltmore steam room, evenings out to dinner. Genovese watched, waited, and started moving pieces. On May 2, 1957, Frank Costello ate late at L'Aiglon, a Manhattan room where the Maître d' knew who mattered. Close to 11 p.m., he walked into the lobby of the Majestic at 115 Central Park West. A heavy-set man in a dark suit shuffled by, hat low. His hand came out of his pocket with a pistol. "This is for you, Frank," he said, and fired once, point blank at Costello's head, then vanished. Costello lived. At Roosevelt Hospital, the detectives emptied his pockets. $3,200 in cash and a note. Gross casino win as of April 27, 1957, $651,284. The number wasn't a guess. With help from Nevada's Control Board and Aaron Cohn in New Orleans, they matched it to the house take at the new Tropicana in Las Vegas. Costello had a hidden piece. He refused to explain the slip. As for the shooter, he gave the classic answer, "I didn't see nothing." Why would anyone want him dead? I haven't an enemy in the world. The doorman had seen plenty. He named Vincent Gigante, a Genovese soldier. Joe Valachi later said Vito Genovese gave the contract. Gigante had even rehearsed in a Greenwich Village basement. At trial, Costello swore he'd never seen Gigante in his life. Acquittal. Costello read the message and announced his retirement. The tax case he'd been fighting landed hard in October 1958. He went back to prison and didn't walk out until June 1961. The government tried to strip his papers and ship him to Italy. Rome wasn't interested. It's not blood that makes a man a criminal, it's society, a spokesman said. And the Supreme Court stopped the deportation in February 1961. He settled back into the Waldorf, the Biltmore steam room, dinner tables across town. On February 7, 1973, he had a mild heart attack, told a friend he'd let Peter Maas do his book, and then, on February 18th, a fatal coronary ended it. Genovese told the street he'd moved on Costello because Frank was talking. Albert Anastasia didn't buy it. If Genovese could order a hit on a boss without commission approval, nobody was safe. At 10:15 a.m., October 25, 1957, Anastasia walked into the Park Sheraton barbershop at 7th and 56th with 2 bodyguards, sat in chair number 4, loosened his tie, and closed his eyes. Barber Joseph Bocchino draped a hot towel over his face. The bodyguards drifted away. 2 men came in from the lobby and put .32 and .38 rounds through Anastasia's head and body, blasting him out of the chair. The executioner of Murder Inca had been executed. Afterward, everyone seemed to know something. Sidney Slater, who ran a B-girl joint for Joey Gallo, told the DA that Gallo liked to joke, "From now on, Sydney, call the five of us the barbershop quintet." Vincent Teresa, out of Raymond Patriarca's crew, said Gallo set it up, the shooters were imported from Providence, and the contract came from Anthony Strollo, Genovese's underboss, with Carlo Gambino and Carmine Lombardozzi in on it. Peter Diapolos, one of Gallo's bodyguards, said the paper came through Joe Profaci to the Gallos, who were made for the job. Valachi called it a Genovese Gambino power play. The stories didn't clash so much as overlap. Either way, it wasn't just Vito's ambition. There were other shareholders, Patriarca, Santo Trafficante, Jr., and bigger reasons, which is why 3 weeks later, Genovese needed a room. Appalachian, November 1957. Robert Kennedy would later say the purpose was simple. Genovese had to explain the Costello attempt, and the Anastasia hit the other bosses. Vito wanted Chicago. Stefano Magaddino talked him into upstate New York. Vito never stopped beefing about it, Valachi said. The story Vito planned to tell couldn't be just, "I wanted it." Valachi's line, that Anastasia had sold memberships when the books were open in 1954 for up to $40,000 a head, was weak. The real trouble was Cuba. Anastasia had leaned into Havana, and Havana was Trafficante's cash register. There was even a showdown in Anastasia's suite at the Warwick on October 24th. B. Hill, Trafficante's hotel alias, checked out an hour or two before Anastasia took his last shave. Cuba explained the urgency. In 1957, you got there by ferry from Key West, after a Cuban inspector warned, "There is a revolution in Cuba. No guns, no ammunition, no explosives." Or you flew, 5 hours from New York, 1 from Miami, tourist class $137 and $36 round trip, respectively. The city was 3 parts: the old streets, the dense mid-city, and the suburbs. The Avenida del Puerto fed into the Prado, which rolled into the Malecon, the seawall boulevard. The Hotel Nacional sat on a bluff, where the city met Vedado, its casino, the Casino Parisien, plush and legal. West into Marianao were the country clubs, the Yacht Club, Oriental Park Racetrack, and the open-air Tropicana. The Sans Souci matched it in glitz. In 1958, the last full year before the revolution, tourism tied to that high life was worth $60 million. Meyer Lansky had first taken the national concession in 1937, then shut down for the war. No boats, few planes, no American bankrolls. When Fulgencio Batista returned to power in 1952, Lansky and the stateside Syndicate followed. On an FBI bug in 1962, Angelo De Carlo remembered it clean. The mob had a piece of every joint down there. Batista made it easy. In 1955, he changed the law. Any hotel or nightclub worth $1 million could run a casino. The government would match investments or find Cuban partners. License fees were $25,000 plus 20% of profits, and under the table it was $250,000 straight to the palace. Import duties on materials disappeared. Pit bosses and dealers got 2-year visas. New money built new monuments. Lansky's Havana Riviera rose on the Malecon for $14 million, at least $6 million fronted by state banks. Dino and Eddie Cellini ran the pit. The Havana Hilton, 630 rooms, 30 stories, cost $24 million, much of it from the pension and welfare funds of Cuba's Cooks and Bartenders Union. Varadero's Hotel International went up on the beach. Old rooms changed hands. At the National, Jake Lansky oversaw the games for owners Mo Dalitz, Sam Tucker, Thomas J. McGinty, and Meyer himself. Maria Hemingway called it the place to gamble. Bars everywhere, the staff that never changed, the terrace over the palms and the sea. Trafficante owned slices of the Sans Souci, the Hotel Capri, where Charles Turenne from the Genovese family had a piece, and George Raft hung around, the old Commodoro, and the gleaming Hilton. The Tropicana, all showgirls and ceiling-high palms, was managed by Martin and Pedro Fox for Batista's brother-in-law, Roberto Fernandez y Miranda, the man with the national slot monopoly. The money didn't just come from action, it came from skim. The size is guesswork, but one snapshot told the story. In September 1958, Jake Lansky landed in Miami from Havana. Customs, unusually thorough, found $200,000 in cash and $50,000 in checks. The checks could go to a bank. The cash was supposed to go the other way, to keep the casino banks stocked in dollars. The $200,000 looked like skim. The Cuban National Council of Economy reported 27,000 gambling jobs that year, alongside 5,000 beggars and 11,500 prostitutes. Havana was a full-service vice capital, and the mob's man on the island was Santo Traficante Jr. Against that backdrop, the hits on Costello and Anastasia weren't random blasts. They were adjustments, made so one man could stand in front of the commission and say the rules had been followed, the balance restored, and the money, especially the Cuban money, kept flowing. Santo Traficante Jr. grew up in a house where power was a family business. Born November 14th, 1914 in Tampa, he carried his father's name and eventually his seat. The elder Santo came over from Sicily in 1904 and ran Tampa long enough for the Kefauver Committee to tag him a reputed leader for more than 20 years. You knew Tampa wasn't small time when two of the old man's associates, Joseph Baglici and Ignazio Italiano, turned up at the Hotel Statler meeting in Cleveland, December 5, 1928, a cross-country roll call that included Chicago's Pasquale Lolordo and Giuseppe Giunta, and New York's Joseph Magliocco, Joseph Profaci, and Vincent Mangano. Police raided and made headlines. Capone later made corpses of Lolordo and Giunta. When Santo Sr. died on August 11, 1954, Santo Jr., one of 6 sons, took the wheel. Tampa's money was narcotics and gambling, casino floors when you could get them, and bolita, the Cuban numbers, when you couldn't. He'd apprenticed on the bolita for his father and pushed his own action into Havana, prying the San Souci loose from Pittsburgh's Gabriel Manorino. Within the life, his stock was obvious. On June 4, 1955, at Joseph Profaci's daughter's wedding at the Hotel Commodore in Manhattan, cops watched how the room moved around Traficante. Outside the life, he barely existed. In 1963, Tampa police told the McClellan Committee they could name no legitimate businesses he owned. House, car, possessions, papered in other people's names. Of 23 mob murders since 1928, they had a single conviction. For ordinary homicides, they cleared almost all. Different worlds, different rules. At home, Josephine Traficante called the Senate testimony trash. Pressed, she admitted her husband made quite a bit of money while he was in Havana. Then he wasn't the only one. Under Batista, the island was an open till. When Castro won in 1959, he didn't just throw out a president. He kicked out a business model. Casinos didn't fit the revolution. He shut them in a purification campaign, then reopened some when the payroll dried up, and thousands of dealers, stick men, and showgirls needed checks. The plan: let them run 60 days under the old handlers while the regime found clean owners. Tourists stopped coming, honest operators didn't appear, and one gambler put it simply, for time. Only gamblers can run casinos. You can't get a priest or a garage mechanic. The same year that rearranged Havana also put narcotics front and center for the American families. At Appalachian, or just after, the bosses had to decide how much heroin and cocaine they were willing to wear. Valachi said Frank Costello had tried to slam the door back in 1948 during the Luciano Genovese interregnum. No dope for members. Then Washington raised the stakes. The Boggs Act, 1951, made mandatory time after the first narcotics pinch. The Boggs-Daniel Act, 1956, made the floors stiffer for everyone. The response inside La Cosa Nostra was classic. On paper, members kept their hands clean. In practice, financing and importation were green-lit and street-level dealing was franchised out. Black and Puerto Rican crews would carry the visible risk. Somebody floated the idea of killing known narcotics agents. Cooler heads killed the idea. The profits killed the policy. By 1964, Bureau of Narcotics boss Henry L. Giordano could count the fallout in court numbers. Since 1956, 20 big conspiracy cases against 206 prominent figures. Convictions for 19% of the Genovese, 40% of the Lucchese, and 20% of the Gambino men identified to the committee. The no-dope rule read great in a clubhouse. It failed in the street. Vito Genovese himself was the proof. The government didn't catch him on a wire in a back room. They got him through a ladder built under him. A Puerto Rican dealer uptown, Nelson Silva Cantelops, got grabbed on a sale to an undercover. Facing life, he flipped. The case that followed, 3 months, 6,700 pages of trial transcript in Manhattan Federal Court, stacked 16 defendants under a conspiracy to import and move narcotics. Cantelops was a small piece, but the central witness. 19 days on the stand, a defense gallery full of hard looks, a judge, Alexander Bix, ordering out hecklers and doing nothing about the midnight phone calls to the witness's house. We'll get Cantelops. We'll get you and the kids too, under AUSA Arthur H. Christie's questions. Cantelops named Genovese as the man calling the plays. The jury believed him. 20 years for Vito. In Leavenworth, he told another inmate it was a bum rap. Tax? Fine. This? Number. Ralph Salerno, no friend of fairy tales, called Cantelops' story almost unbelievable. But the conviction stood on appeal, even with Edward Bennett Williams on the papers. Genovese moved prisons and died on February 14, 1969. Cantelops went back to the only world he knew and died in a 1965 bar fight. Back in Tampa, Trafficante kept his public face blank. He split time between the big house on Bristol Avenue and a concrete block place on NE 71st in Miami, allegedly retired, always unavailable for comment. The record said he'd hidden the trail well. The street said he didn't need to talk. His reputation had been made in rooms where doors locked from the inside, Tampa Bolita banks, Havana counting rooms, and in meetings where rank revealed itself by who stood first when he entered. Casinos could be closed by a decree. Drug statutes could set mandatory floors. Families could issue rules about what members could touch. But the traffic, money from dice, cards, slips and packets, found its way around every wall. In that economy, Santo Trafficante Jr. was exactly what the life valued. Quiet hands on loud cash, a man whose name was spoken softly and whose reach was understood without being explained. Within days of Appalachian, the Bureau put names on a board and called it the Top Hoodlum Program. Every field office with a mob problem was told to build files on the men who ran the room in Joe Barbara's backyard. Under the Kennedys, the handshakes ended and the microphones started. Wiretaps and hidden mics became standard issue. On June 29, 1962, the FBI sent Justice a summary titled The Criminal Commission. From then on, they updated it every 6 months. The FBI's picture matched what the street already knew. Luciano's 1930s commission, the Commission, was the top of La Cosa Nostra. Italians only. Its word overruled any family boss. How that power played out hit the Bureau's tapes on September 21st, 1964, when Sam de Cavalcante schooled Joseph Ziccarelli of the Bonanno crew. The commission was formed by the people, all bosses, who gave the commission the right to supersede any boss. Joe Bonanno knows that. He made the rules. He tried to move in California. The commission chased him out. They were trying to take over DeSimone's Los Angeles outfit. Sam laid out precedent. When Joseph Profaci died, June 5, 1962, his underboss, Joe Magliocco, tried to slide into the big chair. The commission bounced him. "Who the hell are you to take over a Borgata?" When we had trouble in our outfit, they came right in. "You people belong to the commission until this is straightened out." Same thing in Pittsburgh. They made the boss John, La Rocca, Ziccarelli said. La Rocca, step down. So, he wasn't boss anymore. It straightened out now, but Joe Bonanno was in on that deal. They made La Rocca take orders from the commission until the smoke cleared. 1963 membership roll. New York's Gerardo Catena, wearing Genovese's coat after Vito went away. Tommy Lucchese, Carlo Gambino, Joe Bonanno. Chicago's Sam Giancana. Detroit's Joseph Zerilli. Buffalo's Stefano Magaddino. Philadelphia's Angelo Bruno. They called themselves Rappresentanti, the representatives. Disputes went to an arguimando, a sit-down. Bruno explained the ritual to De Cavalcante on February 11, 1962. If a gambling beef went to a sit-down, the reps had to show, like it or not. You brought your man? They brought theirs. The table settled it. A boss was a capo. Under him, the sotto capo, underboss, and a grey-beard advisor, the consigliere. On August 31, 1964, De Cavalcante told Joe Sfera, his caporegima and a labourer's business agent, what the commission thought of Joe Bonanno. He made his son consigliere, and when the commission asked to see him, the kid didn't show. Each family broke into regime, crews run by capodecine/capo regime, capodecina literally head of 10. On June 4, 1965, De Cavalcante demoted Sfera. Are you taking him off capo regima too? Yeah. Crewmen were soldati, button men. Early 60s tapes caught De Cavalcante, Anthony Boiardo, and Angelo De Carlo comparing induction dates. Boiardo. My father said you had to be made 25 years ago. De Cavalcante. 20. Around 45. I was made before the blade. Charlie Turin. Jerry Catena got made 6 months before me. When they made me in Italian. Everybody spoke Italian. By 1963, the Bureau pegged national membership at 4,000 to 5,000, half of it in the New York Metro. 24 families. New York City, 5. Genovese, 600. Lucchese, 150. Gambino, 1,000. Bonanno, 400. Profaci, 200. Philadelphia, Bruno, 200. Chicago, Giancana, 300. Buffalo, Magaddino, 300. Detroit, Zerilli, 250. Newark, De Cavalcante, 40. Milwaukee, Frank Ballistrieri, 50. San Jose, Joseph Cerrito, 30. Kansas City, Nick Civella, 75. Denver, James Coletti, 40. San Francisco, James Lanza, 12. Pittsburgh, John La Rocca, 50. Los Angeles, Frank De Simon, 75. New Orleans, Carlos Marcello, 50. New England, Raymond Patriarca, 150. Cleveland, John Scalish, 150. St. Louis, Tony Giordano, 35. Scranton, Russell Bufalino, 50. Tampa, Santo Trafficante, 75. Dallas, Joseph Civello, 25. Not all families were equal. Milwaukee took orders from Chicago. Some outfits were satellites, a few had exemptions. New Orleans, first American Borgata, had old country privileges, no need to clear every move, even memberships, with the commission. Stability paid. Outside knife fights in New York, most cities settled into quiet money. Cleveland passed the crown from Frank Milano, retired to Mexico, to John Scalish. The Mayfield road mob folded into Cosa Nostra without a drumbeat. Best case, Detroit. Joe Zerilli and his brother-in-law William Tocco, stock from Terracini, tied up with Profaci by marriage. Their East Side gang ran legal businesses and bootlegging. The Purple Gang, Jewish and wild, ruled the Northwest Side until 1930, then got run out. Zerilli consolidated, and the body count proved it. 1917 to 1930, 135 gangland killings. 1931 to 1962, 135 gangland killings. 1962 to 1967, 135 gangland killings. 1967 to 1972, 135 gangland killings. 1972 to 1977. Numbers became the money machine, and 1931 put Zerilli on the commission. The bugs caught the mood swing. These were men used to running the table. Now they were on defense. The language aimed at Hoover was nasty, the venom reserved for the Kennedys, especially Robert. February 9th, 1962, Angelo Bruno and fixer William Weisberg spit nails. Weisberg, with Kennedy, somebody ought to stick a knife in him. Somebody's got to get rid of this Ciao. I'll do it. In the White House, Bruno, playing long game, answered with an old country parable. Every king looks worse than the last, and the next one could be worse than this one. Then he ticked off new laws, no bail talk, immunity, to break the fifth. Weisberg grumbled about agencies finally sharing files. Bruno's bottom line, this Attorney General was tougher than the last, and the next might be tougher still. By May 2nd, 1962, heat met strategy. Mike Clemente, a Genovese captain. Bob Kennedy won't stop until he puts us all in jail, until the commission meets and puts its foot down. April 3rd, 1963. Immaculate Heart of Mary, Brooklyn. Funeral for the father of Carmine Lombardozzi, a Gambino captain. Agents worked the wake for IDs. The pallbearers didn't appreciate it. They beat FBISA John P. Foley, stole his gun, and marched into the church. Inside the bureau, alarms. April 30th, 1963. Associate Director Courtney Evans told Alan Belmont, no broad green light from the bosses to hit agents, but Giancana was watching to see how far they'd push back. Street agents started leaning on Gambino's people hard. One wise guy got worked over and tossed in an ash can. A court-approved bug caught the message pitch to Peter Ferrara, a Gambino capo. Talk, or we visit your daughter, the nun. Right now they're giving you the zing, an associate told Ferrara. You want us to go to the convent? Repercussions came fast. May 20th, 1963, Bruno told his men the Bureau made an example, crippled one of Lombardozzi's guys, and said, we're even. Touch an agent again, and we change methods. June 6th, 1963, at his funeral home, Stefano Magaddino pounded the table. This administration, from the president down, was coming. They beat Carmine, plenty, he said. The FBI's message, that's the warning. June 22nd, 1962, Atlanta Penitentiary. Joseph Valachi grabbed a 2-foot pipe and killed John Saup. He thought he was smashing Joe Di Palermo, a hitter Vito Genovese supposedly put on him. It was the wrong man and the right moment. Valachi broke with the life. The break didn't stay secret. By April 23rd, 1963, Angelo De Carlo and a pal were already muttering someone was talking. The feds suddenly knew who was boss, underboss, the commission, the capos. De Carlo named him Joe Kago, Valachi. Once he testified, the death sentence followed. September 17th, 1963, Magaddino said it flat. We passed laws, this guy's got to die. A month later, another voice, wife of a Bruno associate on the line, wrote it off as politics. Robert Kennedy's hearings. They're murdering the Italian race. New York tried a different angle. Discredit Valasci. Whisper he was crazy. Point to family history. Feed dirt to friendly reporters, even a Pulitzer winner who'd been compromised with a girl. It didn't matter. When the lights went off and the microphones clicked, Hoover called Senator McClellan and said what the tapes already proved. The hearings shook them up. Carlos Marcello knew his way around a witness chair. He'd already faced Kefauver in 51, and McClellan run by Robert F. Kennedy in 59. He beat a contempt rap from the first go-round and skated past the second on Fifth Amendment grounds. Public heat was part of the job. The Kennedy administration was something else. Kefauver's staff called Marcello the New Orleans boss. Wrong era. In 1951, the man on top was Sam Carolla, heir to Charles Matranga, who'd outlived the 1891 lynch mob that followed Chief David Hennessey's murder. Carolla came over from Sicily in 1904, grew up in the French market under Matranga, and went into liquor as soon as Prohibition hit. He did time in 1923 for hijacking booze, came back in 1925, and tightened his grip, personally shotgunning rival William Bailey in 1930. A year later, he and Capo Frank Tadaro caught 2 years for wounding a federal agent, Cecil Moore. While Carolla was in and out of prison, Frank Costello and Huey P. Long moved Costello's slot machines from LaGuardia's New York to Louisiana. Carolla blessed the action and sent a young soldier to help run it, fresh out of Angola after 4 years for masterminding a grocery stick-up. Carlos Marcello, 22, started climbing. By 1947, Carolla, Costello, and Meyer Lansky had layered on a race wire, plush casinos, and the slots. Marcello handled New Orleans' end. That same year, the feds deported Carolla to Sicily, despite a friendly congressman's private bills. Columnist Drew Pearson blew the play. The bills died. Carolla slipped back twice and eventually died in New Orleans in 1972, but his power didn't. It settled on Marcello. By 1963, Marcello was both boss and one of Louisiana's richest men. The Metropolitan Crime Commission pegged the enterprise at staggering numbers: $500 million a year from illegal gambling, $100 million from action in 1,500 syndicate bars, $8 million from pro-burglaries and stick-ups, $6 million from prostitution, and $400 million tied up in legitimate transportation, finance, housing, and service plays. He told reporter Michael Donaldson he was just a tomato salesman on about $1,000 a month with some land on the side. People take a little truth, twist it, add a lot of bullshit. Life magazine later put his personal worth at $40 million. On paper, he owned next to nothing. In reality, he controlled motels, a jukebox and vending outfit, a sightseeing bus line, and Churchill Farms, 6,500 acres outside New Orleans in Jefferson Parish, priced around $22 million. Titles lived with family. Son Joseph held the Town and Country Motel. Brother Peter, a capo, held the show bar on Bourbon. Marcello kept his name off the marquee, and even sent underboss Brother Joseph to Appalachian in 57 instead of going himself. Marcello had a thin immigration file and thick enemies. On March 31st, 1961, with Robert Kennedy newly sworn in, the INS recommended a quiet, immediate removal. Final order signed, plan held tight. Marcello didn't hear a word until April 4th, when he walked into the New Orleans INS office for his routine alien check-in. They slapped on cuffs, ran the sirens, and drove him to Moisant. A border patrol plane was already turning. "You'd have thought it was the president coming in instead of 100 going out," he said later. They flew him 1,200 miles and dumped him in Guatemala City. No luggage, little cash. Within hours he was in a Biltmore suite, his brothers flying in clothes and money. Then politics hit. President Miguel Ydígoras Fuentes ordered him expelled. Marcello and his lawyer, Michael Maroon of Shreveport, were hustled to a remote village in El Salvador and abandoned. Soldiers jailed and grilled them 5 days, bussed them 20 miles into the mountains, and left them again. In silk shantung and alligator shoes, the 5'2" Marcello fainted 3 times on the 8-hour trek out. He said he cracked 2 ribs in a downhill fall. They hired muchachos to reach an airstrip, spooked, bolted into the jungle, and eventually made the coast. Marcello claimed he flew commercial to Miami. A later wiretap suggested a Dominican Air Force lift. Either way, he was back illegally. On June 3, 1961, his lawyers admitted it. He was inside the US in hiding and could be produced in court. The next day, Robert Kennedy owned the deportation publicly, in strict accordance with the law, and said he was happy Marcello was gone. He also said if he'd handled it personally, he would have chosen different steps. The mechanics were INS Director Joseph Swings. Courts later upheld the Guatemala drop. Marcello never forgot the humiliation. Seated before the House Senate Committee on Assassinations on January 11, 1978, he came alive only on this topic. Marshals put the handcuffs on me, told me I was being kidnapped. 30 minutes I was in the plane. They dumped me off in Guatemala. Let me use the phone to call my wife. Get my clothes. They just snatched me. He put the blame where he'd always kept it. He said he'd see I be deported as soon as he got in office. He got in January 20. April 4th he deported me. No grudge, he added. He just done what he thought was right. But it was unfair. The government didn't stop the plane ride. April 10, 1961, the IRS filed an $835,396 lien on Marcello and his wife. June 8th, 6 days after his lawyers admitted he was home, a federal grand jury indicted him for illegal re-entry. 4 months later, Kennedy announced a second indictment, conspiracy to defraud the United States with a bogus Guatemalan birth certificate. Marcello tried to erase a 1938 marijuana conviction, the case the cops had called the biggest ring in New Orleans history, because clearing it made deportation harder. On October 31st, 1962, he lost. On November 4th, 1963, he went to trial in New Orleans on the false papers case. November 22nd, he was acquitted minutes after the president's murder reached the courtroom. Less than a year later, October 6th, 1964, came another indictment. Jury bribery tied to the 63 acquittal and obstruction of justice. A plot to murder the key government witness, Carl Knoll. The bribery case collapsed. The obstruction count died when Knoll refused to testify. Marcello walked out the door the way he'd come up, quiet, insulated and dangerous enough that everybody in the room understood exactly who they were dealing with. On October 10th, 1963, the FBI caught Sam Giancana talking in the Armory Lounge in Forest Park, Illinois. He told an associate, Charles English, that Valachi couldn't hurt Chicago. New York, sure, but not Chicago. He was under pressure anyway. The Kennedys had put a target on his back, and Giancana had earned it. An aggressive climber who'd taken power the old way, with nerve and violence. His father, Antonio, came from Castelvetrano in 1905, a pushcart peddler then, and a pushcart peddler after Polk Street Station. Chicago was soot, wind, and cold. The family bounced from South Aberdeen to Van Buren. Little Italy crept west, block by block. On May 24th, 1908, Lena gave birth to Salvatore. Sam, later Mooney. And by 1925, he was on West Taylor with the 42s, a neighborhood gang that thought big. He was proud of his driving, a wheelman who could slide a Packard through traffic like it was on rails. First collar, auto theft, September 2025. Before 20, he'd been hauled in 3 times on murder beefs, one for a witness hit in his own robbery case, another for Octavius Granadi, a black reformer trying to win the 20th ward. The arrests piled up to 60 by 1963. The hard time came for auto theft, burglary, and moonshining. In November 1928, he was caught inside a clothing store break. He pled out and got 1 to 5 at Joliet, released Christmas Eve, 1932. He didn't drift. He got noticed by Felice de Lucia. Paul, the waiter, Rica. Slow voice, steady hands. Capone's heir apparent after Scarface went down on tax charges in 1932. Rica had stood up Esposito's beer runners, worked with the Jenners, and then Capone. He met Luciano in the Congress Hotel to confirm the Chicago line of succession. Giancana became Rica's driver and started moving up. In 1939, the feds pinched Giancana for running a massive still. 8,800 gallons of mash, 1,000 of alcohol, and gave him 4 years. They shipped him to Terre Haute, tested him, low verbal, better non-verbal, and he went to school anyway. Not books, policy. Edward Jones, a black policy king out of Chicago doing time for tax, showed him the numbers business, steady cash, neighborhood discipline, real scale. When Sam walked in December 42, he had a playbook. He registered for the draft, was evaluated constitutional psychopath with an inadequate personality, 4F, and went back to work. Rica caught an extortion case the next year, and Giancana watched how big money got made and lost on a national stage. With Prohibition dead, the Capone outfit needed a new spigot. They took the Stagehands Union, IATSE, and installed George E. Brown as top man, with Willie Byoff as the bagman. In 1936, Byoff told Nicholas M. Schenck of lose what it would cost to keep the cameras rolling, $2 million. The studios, Fox, RKO, Warner's, MGM, lose, paid. The scheme blew open through a tax case on Joe Schenck at 20th Century Fox. He rolled on Byoff and Brown, who rolled on Rica, Frank Nitti, Nick Serkella, Louis Campagna, and John Roselli. In court, Byoff said quitting the syndicate meant quitting life, which was why he never resigned. The jury believed the government. Nitti killed himself. The rest took 10 years at Leavenworth on December 31st, 1943. Despite the judge and prosecutor asking for no breaks, they were paroled August 13th, 1947, 1/3 served, thanks to Murray Humphrey's smoothing things with Washington. When the scandal surfaced later, even the Supreme Court nomination of Tom Clark carried the stink. Byoff's line about quitting life aged badly. On November 4th, 1955, the day his former partners were safely off parole, he got into his car in Phoenix. The starter triggered a bomb. End of story. Out of prison, Giancana went back to Edward Jones, this time for seed money. With that and a side hustle counterfeiting gas and ration stamps, he moved to 1147 South Winona in Oak Park, a yellow brick, red tile roof, respectability on a quiet street. In May 1946, he paid Jones back his way. Jones was grabbed off a Chicago street, kept 5 days, and dumped with tape on his face and cotton in his ears. No money changed hands. The deal was simpler. Jones retired to Mexico. Giancana became a partner in the Black Belt numbers. In the months that followed, bombs, kidnappings, and ambushes shook the South Side. By the end, the syndicate had consolidated the horse rooms, wire service, casinos, and policy wheels. They'd swapped bootleg liquor for gambling as the main line. Giancana's reward, driver to Anthony Accardo. Antonino Leonardo Accardo, born in Chicago, April 28, 1906, was a shoemaker's kid from the patch who worked his way up. Early rep, shooter. He was looked at on St. Valentine's Day 1929 and arrested, beating it, on a gun count tied to the Julius Rosenheim hit a year later. His lawyer, Roland Libernati, would later carry Chicago's water in Congress. By the 40s, Accardo ran rooms, including the Al Club in Calumet City, the Syndicate's backyard. When Nitti died in 43 and Rica went down in 44, Accardo took the wheel. The outfit prospered. So did he. In 1950, he moved into a 22-room showpiece at 915. Franklin in River Forest. Pool and gardens, carved interiors, 3 baths with gold-plated fixtures, and a 10-grand bathtub cut from Mexican onyx. The IRS noticed. On April 25, 1960, they indicted him for tax evasion, 56 through 58. He beat the case on appeal, 2-1, January 5, 1962. The Bureau's electronics hinted the fix was in. Later, probes couldn't prove it. Perjury convictions did land on defense witnesses. Robert Kennedy ordered a retrial. On October 3, 1962, Accardo walked again. He stepped back anyway and handed the top job to Sam Giancana. By the time the FBI bugged that lounge in 63, Giancana had the city wired the way his teachers intended. Policy in-house, casinos under control, the wire steady, and a federal war he couldn't drive around. He told himself Valachi's mouth would wreck New York, not Chicago. Then he went back to work, the way he always had: quiet meetings, careful money, and a readiness to use muscle when the talk stopped working. The public often reduces men like Sam Giancana to their most obvious quality, violence, making them seem animalistic and crude. But that caricature misses the deeper truth. As William Brashler noted in The Don, for all his brutality, Giancana possessed a beguiling, lilting charm and could envelop those around him into a coven of understanding about affairs mundane or treacherous. His charm, especially effective with women, became as much a part of his legend as his temper. Giancana had been relatively faithful to his wife Angeline until her death in April 1954. After that, he was constantly pursuing women, waitresses, dancers, wives of associates. But his relationship with Phyllis McGuire, the youngest and most glamorous of the McGuire sisters, was different. They met in Las Vegas in 1960, and Giancana quickly became infatuated. Phyllis, known for her beauty and voice, had run up a $100,000 gambling debt at the Desert Inn. Giancana told Morris Dalitz, who ran the casino, to eat it. Dalitz did, and Giancana and McGuire's relationship deepened. In 1961, McGuire leased the Green Gables Ranch just outside Las Vegas, and Giancana began using it as his Nevada headquarters, managing his hidden casino interests from there. The Chicago outfit had taken an interest in Las Vegas in the late 1950s. Declared an open city, meaning no single mafia family controlled it, the booming gambling town was ripe for investment. By the end of 1960, both Giancana and Anthony Accardo had hidden stakes in several casinos, despite Nevada law prohibiting known criminals from ownership. Giancana secretly held interests in the Desert Inn and the Stardust, both nominally owned by Dalitz. The relationship with McGuire began to create serious problems for Giancana. In 1963, his close friend Frank Sinatra owned 50% of the Cal Neva Lodge, a casino on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe. Giancana often boasted that through Sinatra, he had a share of Cal Neva, a claim seemingly confirmed when Sinatra hired New Jersey mobster Paul D'Amato to protect Giancana's interests. Giancana and McGuire were frequent guests at Cal Neva, staying in a chalet next to the main hotel. But their high-profile visits in July 1963 attracted the attention of the Nevada State Gaming Commission. Sinatra was called to explain Giancana's involvement. Initially defiant, he was eventually forced to divest his $3 million stake in Cal Neva and a 9% share in the Sands Hotel worth $390,000. The Cal Neva incident highlighted the mob's much larger financial interests in Nevada. In the 1960s, Las Vegas had become a gold mine. Jet travel, a booming economy, and its status as an entertainment capital drove gaming revenues from $216.3 million in 1961 to $330 million by 1965. But federal surveillance revealed that vast sums weren't being reported. FBI bugs and IRS surveillance, part of Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy's organized crime offensive, documented massive skimming. In March 1962 alone, $200,000 disappeared from the Desert Inn. In January 1963, $280,000 was skimmed from the Fremont, Sands, Flamingo, and Horseshoe casinos. The estimated illegal annual take between 1960 and 1964 was at least $19 million. The skimmed cash was moved overseas to the International Bank of Credit in Geneva or the Bank of World Commerce in Nassau, or distributed to syndicate bosses in the US. A hidden 0.1% share in a casino sold for $52,500 and generated monthly dividends of $1,000 to $1,500, roughly a 25% annual return. As mobster Angelo DiCarlo explained on an FBI bug, "You get $1,000 a month for a point, and sometimes $1,500. You got to steal $100,000, not win it. The only thing you get is a piece of what they steal." Kennedy's crackdown threatened this revenue stream. The FBI tripled its manpower in Nevada, and the IRS opened a 40-agent office in Las Vegas. For the outfit, it was potentially the worst financial blow since Castro shut down Havana's casinos in 1959. "There's a lot of money invested in Las Vegas," DiCarlo said. "If anything goes wrong." Organized crime in Chicago didn't start with Prohibition. By the 1840s, Chicago already had a reputation for corruption. After the Great Fire of 1871, saloons and brothels clustered on Dearborn Street in the South Side levee. Politically, this was the First Ward, ruled by Michael Hinky Dink Kenner and John Bathhouse Coughlin, bosses whose machine was inseparable from vice and gambling. James Big Jim Colosimo, Chicago's first crime boss, was a pimp and restaurateur who headquartered his operation at Colosimo's Cafe. His successor, Johnny Torrio, Capone's mentor, expanded into bootlegging. Torrio's base, the Four Deuces, was a 4-story headquarters of liquor, gambling, and prostitution. Capone operated from the Metropole Hotel nearby. Kenner and Coughlin's political machine collected tribute from every vice operation. They died in 1938 and 1946, respectively, replaced by Jake Guzik and later Gus Alex as the outfit's political enforcers. The First Ward eventually merged with the 20th Ward, home to the Patch. Its politicians and mob bosses became known as the West Side Bloc, exemplified by Roland Libernati. Elected to the Illinois legislature in 1931, Libernati was photographed that year with Al Capone and Jack Machine Gun McGurn at a Chicago Cubs game. He said he was proud to have spoken with Capone's son. Later, he called DeLucia and Accardo charitable and patriotic. Over 22 years in Springfield, his loyalty to the outfit never wavered. In 1957, he was elected to Congress with 89% of the vote. In an FBI-monitored conversation on October 23, 1962, Libernati bragged that he didn't know his opponent's name and called the idea of opposition laughable. He said, "Last time you guys built me up to 98,000 votes and the other guy to 23,000. He also boasted, "I killed 6 of Kennedy's bills, that wiretap bill, the informer's bill." In January 1963, Giancana ordered Libernati to resign for reasons of poor health. Journalist Ovid Damaris later reported that Mayor Richard J. Daley had been warned by Robert Kennedy that if Libernati stayed, Kennedy would personally see to it that he went to jail. Libernati was succeeded by Frank Annunzio, a former First Ward committeeman tied to two mobsters in the insurance business. The FBI privately reported in 1964 that Annunzio will follow the dictates of the mob. One of Libernati's final acts in Congress was to introduce a bill that would have made it a crime for federal agents to keep gangsters under surveillance. Asked about it, he said, "Yes, I know Giancana. My bill would cover him." By spring 1963, the FBI escalated its campaign against Giancana. He had been a top target since 1961, but now agents implemented lockstep physical surveillance, a 24-hour tail wherever he went, whoever he met. As Brashler wrote, "With his temper and volatile moodiness, they saw a chance to disrupt the man's routine, his private affairs, his very equilibrium, to such an extent that they were certain it would cause him to make mistakes." It worked. Giancana grew isolated. Other mobsters avoided him. The scrutiny even derailed a commission-approved plan, over Florida boss Charles "The Blade" Turin's objections, to take over gambling operations in the Dominican Republic. A crucial meeting with Dominican officials was cancelled because Giancana couldn't move freely. As Charles English put it, "The guy had trouble even having a date." Giancana tried to shake the tails, showing off his driving skills, once speeding through a car wash as attendants shouted, "Go, Mo, go!" But the FBI was waiting on the other side. Agents followed him onto golf courses, out-driving him and mocking his frustration. Desperate, Giancana sought legal relief. With the help of his son-in-law Anthony Tisci, a lawyer on Libernati's congressional staff, he sued the FBI, claiming harassment, humiliation, embarrassment. He even hired a private detective to film the agents. "Take this side," one agent joked. "It's my best side. Then I'll take a picture of you and put a nice mustache under it." Giancana even began attending church again, his first visit to St. Bernardine's in 3 years. On June 27, 1963, he filed suit, calling the surveillance unconstitutional. A federal court initially refused to stop the FBI, but scheduled a hearing. Giancana testified, narrating a 5-minute film of the agents and identifying one as Roger, whom he claimed to have met at O'Hare Airport. Tisci told reporters his congressional job didn't conflict with representing Giancana. The Justice Department argued the court had no authority to control surveillance, so it offered no evidence and refused to cross-examine Giancana. FBI Chicago Chief Martin W. Johnson, under Robert Kennedy's direct orders, refused to answer questions. The court nevertheless issued a limited order, restricting FBI cars near Giancana's home and requiring at least one foursome between him and the agents on the golf course. Johnson was held in contempt and fined $500. Attorney General Kennedy immediately appealed. On July 26, 1963, the Court of Appeals stayed the injunction, ruling that FBI agents were part of the executive branch and not subject to supervision or direction by courts in performing their duties. On June 30, 1964, the stay became permanent, though Johnson's contempt citation was upheld. The lawsuit backfired. Giancana's mansion became a tourist attraction, with neighbors reporting 150 to 200 cars circling the block. Within the outfit, whispers grew that Giancana had lost his edge and effectiveness. When word reached Sam Giancana that President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated on November 22, 1963, he was at the Armory Lounge with singer Keely Smith, a longtime friend, and his associate Charles English. Giancana reacted coolly and even optimistically. Without Kennedy, he remarked, Robert Kennedy would not have the power he previously had. He was right. 3 days later, Giancana and English were again picked up by an FBI listening device as they watched a television replay of Kennedy's funeral. English sang a mocking line. When the caissons go rolling along, before noting that Lee Harvey Oswald was said to have been an anarchist and a Marxist communist. Giancana replied that Oswald was a marksman who knew how to shoot, and observed that with Oswald dead, it would be impossible to know whether he had other contacts or what. It has long been argued that organized crime figures, including Giancana, may have played a role in Kennedy's assassination. Reasonable people can and do disagree about that. What is beyond dispute, however, is that the Mafia was among the assassination's chief beneficiaries. The statistics that measured the performance of the federal government's organized crime program stalled. In July 1965, at the urging of Attorney General Ramsey Clark, President Lyndon B. Johnson banned all electronic surveillance except in national security cases. Never again would the FBI or any other federal investigative agency have as comprehensive, detailed, or accurate an intelligence picture of organized crime as they had built in the early 1960s. Yet the federal campaign against organized crime had gained too much momentum to disappear. A group of liberal Republicans issued a sharply critical report on the decline of the program, and efforts were launched to revive it. The Justice Department rebranded its regional task forces as strike forces. In 1967, the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice called for strengthening the program and recommended a legislative agenda including grand jury reform, immunity authority, perjury, and contempt reform, authorization for wiretapping new efforts to blend criminal and civil remedies. A House committee echoed these calls in 1968. Despite strong opposition from Attorney General Clark and President Johnson, Congress passed the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, which authorized court-approved wiretapping, a major victory for law enforcement. By 1976, the National Wiretap Commission, created under the 1968 law, reported that electronic surveillance had confirmed that syndicated crime continued to pose a major societal threat, and that wiretaps were often vital to exposing and prosecuting organized criminal conspiracies. The Commission emphasized that electronic surveillance was most effective when combined with adequate, well-trained investigative personnel, carefully drafted substantive and procedural laws, support from other segments of the criminal justice system. Finally, in 1970, Congress passed the Organized Crime Control Act, which enacted most of the President's Crime Commission's recommendations, providing powerful new tools to target the Mafia and related enterprises. Today, federal strike forces operate in 14 major cities with 12 sub-offices, and combating organized crime remains a top priority for the Department of Justice. The federal government spends about $100 million annually on organized crime control efforts. FBI Director William H. Webster testified to Congress that roughly 22% of FBI field agent time was devoted to organized crime investigations, resulting in about 632 convictions per year, including 405 racketeering convictions. Of those convicted, 107 were associates or members of the largest organized crime families in the United States. Still, much of what the public knows today about organized crime's reach, its role in violence, political corruption, narcotics, gambling, loan sharking, fencing, arson for profit, cigarette bootlegging, and even infiltration of unions and legitimate businesses, comes from investigative journalists and periodic congressional hearings. No comprehensive review has been undertaken since the President's Crime Commission's landmark work in 1967.